Today we're going to cover 3 different ways how you can target black's most vulnerable square f7 and win within 6 moves. These ways do work indeed, especially on the level up to 1800, and I guarantee that you'll get a lot of juicy victories. Alright, we're talking about the Scotch game that arises after you play pawn to d4 in this position. That attacks the pawn, threatens to push the pawn forward and chase the knight, therefore black will pretty much always capture your pawn, and from here you've got a couple different options. Let's start from the riskiest one, but that also has the highest probability of delivering the really quick checkmate. That's the move knight to g5. Here you take some risk, as the move objectively speaking is not the best, but again, it's high risk, high reward. If black is unaware of this trap, you're highly likely to win within a couple moves from here. Now, when you go knight g5, it's pretty clear that you want to target this square f7, especially because on the next move you can play bishop c4 and attack it once again. Therefore, most of your opponents will be tempted to play pawn h6 and kick this knight back. But instead of moving it back, you're gonna take knight takes f7, exposing the king. Now, king has to take it, because if not, all these heavy pieces are hanging, so king takes, and here comes bishop c4, check to the king. Now, black's natural reaction and the most played move is to move the king back to safety and play king to e8. And there we go. 6 moves in the game, you've got a forcing checkmate from this position. You play queen to h5, check to the king, and you put together something similar to scholar's checkmate. The king moves, after that queen takes just queen to f7, check to the king, and you can easily see that it's nearly over for black. Here you could play bishop f4, pawn e5, like basically chasing this king in whatever way wins for white. For example, after bishop f4, we've got the dancing king here, and after queen to d5, king b6, and queen b5, for example, you've achieved this pretty nice checkmate. And again, since the previous moves of black are very natural, you're highly likely to achieve right this position. If you have any questions about this particular gambit, I've got another video where I analyze in greater details different what-ifs, what if black played some other moves. You may check it out later. Let's move on to the second trap. After e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, the most standard chess moves, we still go for the Scotch Gambit, pawn d4, and after black captures, instead of knight g5, which is kind of not particularly sound, objectively speaking, we'll play a much more logical move, bishop c4, bringing the bishop into play. What will your opponent do here? The 2 moves which are by far the most popular for black are either bishop to c5 or a knight to f6, because black needs to develop his minor pieces and try to castle. We're going to analyze both of these moves. Let's start off with bishop c5, a very natural move by black, developing a bishop and also holding on to this extra pawn on d4. Now what you do here is you play pawn c3, threatening to capture the pawn and then attack the bishop. And here, the most played move by black clearly is pawn takes c3, which turns out to be a bad mistake. It blunders the move bishop takes f7, and here we are, 6 moves in the game, you've achieved the winning position once again. King takes f7 is more or less forced, and then you follow up with queen to d5, which is a double attack to the king and the bishop, which allows you to regain material with interest. In most cases, black drops their king back to e8. Playing king to f8 feels worse for black, because after that you take on c5 with check, therefore most players play king to e8. Here, although you could take on c5 straight away, I recommend that you toss in this in-between check queen h5. The idea is that you induce this move pawn g6, which additionally weakens this diagonal, and in the future is going to help your attack. Now you capture the bishop, and this position is pretty hopeless for black, although it may not seem like you can checkmate black within a couple moves here, but notice that this king has made moves, therefore it can no longer castle, it's gonna stay there in the middle of the board. Also, this diagonal is terribly weak. For example, if black tries to, save this pawn and wants to capture here, you tell him thank you, and after you recapture, you can easily see that black's in big trouble. So your plan here basically is simply to continue your development, play castle, knight takes c3, bishop g5, very simple moves, and you win because again black's stuck here with this vulnerable king, weaknesses along that diagonal, and you just win with very simple moves. I'll show you one game as an example of that. Black played queen e7, offering an exchange of queens. Clearly we do not want that, we want to attack this king, therefore white played queen takes c3, gaining that pawn and also hitting the rook on h8. Once again, you can see how handy it is for white to have this pawn on g6, not on g7, where it's a lot safer for black. Now, here black noticed that this pawn on e4 is hanging, therefore he gladly captured it, and here, although white could cover his king, but white played a really bold move, king to d1, saying, hey, I don't care, I'm gonna play rook e1 and win a lot of material along this file. Black played the final check queen d5, but after bishop d2 it turns out that not only the king is in danger, but also black has no defense to his rook. It's hanging and there is no way for black to save material. He's gonna sacrifice something and his king is still weak, therefore it's completely winning for white. That covers bishop to c5, after which we're gonna play pawn c3 and win the game. Clearly there is one more move that you gotta be ready for, one of the most natural moves for black to play, knight to f6, and if I'm not mistaken it's actually the most played move in this position. Now, in a moment I'm gonna share with you how you can win in this case, but prior to that, let me remind you real quick that right now for a couple more days you can still take advantage of our special offers to celebrate the International Father's Day. And you can get any of our courses or packages at a massive discount, up to 80% discount. Throughout these years, I've taught hundreds of students personally and thousands over the internet, and I just know what methods are the most efficient for people. So I'll be happy to help you achieve your chess goals if you're interested in that, and if so, you can click the link below the video and take advantage of our current special offers. Now, the variation that somewhat guarantees your win here still uses the same weakness of the square f7, and we go knight to g5, hitting this pawn twice. And in this position, the most natural move for black to play is going to be pawn to d5. After that, we trade on d5, black recaptures with the knight, and here we are, 6 moves in the game, and once again you have achieved a winning position. It's really hard, nearly impossible for black to figure out that their last move, knight takes d5, was a deadly error. It's like the most natural move to play. But the black's problems is that they lose, similar to the fried liver attack if you're familiar with that. But we don't play knight takes f7 straight away, we first castle. If you play knight takes f7 right now, which is a wrong move to play, we would love for black to capture with their king, but instead black has queen e7 check, which ruins our plans. That's why we did not play that move immediately, but instead you castle first. And it turns out that black is still defenseless. You just have too much pressure against black's position and they can't cope with it. You've got this knight as well as the bishop putting pressure along this diagonal. Rook e1 is coming, attacking black's king along the f-file. You've got potentially queen f3 in some variations that can hit the knight as well as this pawn on f7, so you simply have way too many threats for black to handle. In most cases they play bishop e7 trying to put their king to safety, and right at this very moment you sack your knight on f7. And after king takes, we play in this fried liver attack style, queen f3 with a double attack to the king, as well as this knight on d5, which allows you on the next move to regain a piece, but black's king is now completely exposed and you have a very easy attack against the king. They usually play bishop e6, now you trade bishops, and it's clear that this king is in big trouble. You can here attack with very simple moves like rook e1, check to the king. If king goes back, queen b3, check to the king from the other side. The king usually will go back to f8, now the rook can be activated, queen takes b7, you snatch the pawn here, the king is still weak, you're attacking the knight, you can go bishop f4 and threaten the other pawn, and you can see that overall black's position simply falls apart. Just to make sure that you're ready to handle whatever your opponent tries against you, let me show with you real quick the final variation. Here after knight to g5 and bishop to c4, teaming up against this pawn on f7, in most cases black is going to go pawn d5, and after pawn takes, that leads to that kind of fried liver attack where you win. But what if your opponent goes knight e5 and tries to defend the pawn as well as counterattack your bishop on c4? There's a really interesting variation here that I would recommend. You play bishop b3, saving this bishop, keeping more pressure here, and now you want to either play queen takes d4, maybe pawn f4, kick this knight away and get to the pawn. Your opponent will play pawn h6, hoping for your knight to go back, but instead you counter-strike with the move pawn to f4, and that leads to a very interesting position. Black captures your knight, you capture his knight. Now this knight is hanging on f6 and it doesn't have that many options, so knight will probably capture on e4, you play queen takes d4. This knight is now attacked. Now, in most cases, your opponents will go back knight to c5 because they're gonna save this knight somehow. Those opponents who solve tactical drills regularly may find a tactical shot for black, which they think is winning for them. It's the move knight to g3. Here they make use of the fact that your rook is, this pawn is pinned down to the rook, and they may think that this variation wins for them. But let this be a puzzle of the day for you. So please think about this, and if you can find a winning move for white, please write it down in the comments below. Again, in most cases, the knight will go back to c5, and here you simply castle. And although currently black is a pawn up, you can see that his position is not easy. You put a lot of pressure against this f7 pawn, which somewhat forces black to trade off this bishop, and after pawn takes, the first black's problem is that he's completely underdeveloped, and you're way ahead in development. Now this pawn on g5 is somewhat weak. Also, strangely enough, you're attacking the a7 pawn because you attack it twice, and it's only defended by his rook once. In light of that, a lot of your opponents will figure out that they can play a move pawn to b6, which covers the pawn on a7, but also sets a little trap. So at this moment, your opponent secretly hopes that you'll play some casual move, something like knight to c3, and then your opponent will happily pin your queen and win the game. But instead of that, it turns out that b6 was what we call a rookie error. After queen d5, you win a rook, because your double attack here, the f7 square, threatening checkmate, as well as the rook. Black can't defend both, therefore he's going to probably lose the rook on a8, and you win the game once again. Let me know how these traps worked out for you, or if you have any questions, I'll be sure to follow up. Also, don't forget that if you want to level up your chess and reach the level of 2000 rating or win local tournaments or whatever your chess goals are, I'll be happy to help for a couple more days. You still can make use of our special offers in honor of the International Father's Day. So if you're interested, click the link on the screen or below the video in the description, and I'll be sure to help you as much as I can. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.